Thank you, Julian. What a guy. I don't know how come I never got here. I used to live over here in Cleveland, but I guess I left Cleveland just shortly after this conference began. I moved south about 12 years ago. But here I am, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much. As Julian says, he better get off and let me get on with this because he knows. I was told to limit my talk tonight, so I will just spend the first hour and a half talking about myself. The second hour, I'll talk about the program. It's certainly wonderful to see a crowd like this gathered together, and you look so grand out there. I wish everyone could see you from this vantage point. Anytime I see a good-looking bunch like this together, it always reminds me of a story. I'm not too much of a storyteller, but there's one story I do like, and this always reminds me of it. It's about Jerry, the town drunk. Maybe some of you folks have heard this story. This Jerry, he had never been seen sober. Many, many years. He was drunk all the time. And Jerry he always had a dirty beard. He never had a haircut. He was filthy. His bare feet were on the ground. There's holes in his britches, and he stunk. This was normal for Jerry. He always drunk. Time went on, many years went on, and finally Jerry turned up his toes and died. And this presented a problem in the town. They had to bury him. He had no one who would claim him, so the town had to get together, and they got an undertaker who furnished a casket and got him a new suit and shaved him up and cleaned him up real nice, and they got him prepared for burial. Then they had to get a preacher to take care of the funeral sermon. It was kind of a tough job to get a preacher to do this job. Finally they got one, and this preacher, he came up there to give the funeral sermon, oration, and he was stumped. He just didn't know quite what to say. So he says, well, folks, he says, I admit, I just don't know what to say about Jerry. You all knew him. We all knew him here. We knew him for what he was. He says, but I'd just like you all to do one thing. He says, I'd like you all to come up here and take a good look at Jerry and see how good he looks since he quit drinking. I think this happens to all of us in a more or less degree. I'm glad we all didn't have to die to get this compliment. People change very quickly in AA when they come here. I think every person here is a miracle, every one of us. I know in my case it had to be a miracle that I ever arrived here. I'd like to tell you just how I did get into this fellowship. As Julian mentioned, I had my 25th anniversary last February. And at that time, there was no AA. This is the way we do things. Everything starts backwards. This was not known as AA in those days. And yet I got in it, see. No AA, but I got in it. I was on the bum, and I was having trouble at home, and my wife was giving me my last chance to make good at home. And this was on the premise that I should go to work for her brother, bless his heart. This was quite a family I was mixed up with in those days. This is not the wife I have now, I might say without, I won't have to mention that. He drove a truck. He had a truck that ran between Cleveland and New York. And they told me that if I would take a job as his assistant and learn how to drive this truck, that I could prove to them that I wasn't this drunk and so that they were all calling me and accusing me of being. Why, they'd give me another chance at home. So there's nothing I could do but accept this challenge. Now, I'm a fellow who does not believe in work. I never did. And getting sober hasn't changed this very much either. But the idea of driving one of those big outfits was really out of this world. But I had to go ahead with this deal. So I told him I would, so away we went. This was in the fall of the year. And we headed for New York. I didn't arrive in New York sober. I got away from him in Albany. And I remember this. I remembered that Albany was the capital of New York, and I suddenly developed a keen desire to see the government buildings. He had to take a nap that evening, so I got out and got away from him. And you know what happened. But I got back, and he was sleeping on the seat there, and I stepped on the poor boy's face getting up into the sleeping part of the cab, and he knew what was wrong. He carried me on to New York and threw me out on the waterfront, and there I was. Well, I had no money, I had no clothes, I had no nothing. But I had a sister-in-law, another sister of his, bless her heart, in Yonkers. And she used to think I was pretty good. She always used to refer to me as her favorite brother-in-law. This was some time before this, however. And I went out to see Virginia, thought maybe she'd look after me. Here I was in a town of 7 or 8 million people, and I didn't know a soul. I made my way out to Yonkers, and I remembered I'd gone there on my honeymoon when we first gotten married, so I knew that she lived way up on top of a hill. When I got out there, I didn't go up on a hill, I went down a hill and got in this Italian section down there. And I met some very nice people, and they were drinking wine. And you know what happened. By the time I got up to Virginia's place, I was really potted. I was boiled. And I can only remember one thing about this trip to Virginia's house. I was rolling around on the floor with her 2 kids. She didn't like this. She took a dim view of this, and she put me in the back of her car and drove me down to that waterfront and dumped me out where her brother had dumped me. So I was in New York without a dime, without a friend, without anything, period. And a winter sitting in. I don't know how long I stayed in New York. It's not important, but I existed there a long, long time. I tell this story for this reason, that eventually this played a big part in my coming into AA. It seems that sometime later, Virginia had her doctor over about one of the kids, and they got to talking about drinking. And she told this doctor about this drunken brother-in-law of hers and what a nice guy he used to be and what a slob he is now. And the doctor says, you know, that's odd. He says, I used to have a drunken brother-in-law like that too. But he met some cult or other, and they do nothing but, he does nothing but run around fixing drunks. And besides this brother-in-law, there's a doctor down in Akron, Ohio, who's in this strange cult, and he spends all his time doing this. And this doctor suggested that if I should ever land back in Cleveland, maybe they could send me to this doctor down there, and maybe he could fix me. Well, he was referring to Dr. Smith, Dr. Bob, Doc Smith in Akron. This doctor Virginia was talking to happened to be Dr. Leonard Strong, who is Bill Wilson's brother-in-law. Now, at that time, there was no AA. There were probably a half a dozen, 6, 8, 10 people had ever been exposed to this plan through the old Oxford group. Sometime later, I got back to Cleveland. I got a ride back with another truck driver. And he took me to Erie, and from Erie I beat my way in, and I got back home, and I tried to get in the nest, but it didn't work. The little woman met me at the door, and she was pleasant enough so long as I was outside. And she told me about this doctor in Akron, Ohio, and asked me if I'd like to go down and see him. So what could I lose? Sure, I'll go down and see him. So she bought me a one-way bus ticket, put me on a bus and sent me to Akron. And this was my first meeting with Doc Smith. Now, the first time I went down there, I got down there very early in the morning. And it was a winter time. Everything happens to me in zero weather. I don't know why this is. It's always lousy weather when anything happens to me. And I got into this Second National Bank building in Akron. I went up to the floor where Doc's office was, and he wasn't in. And I can recall, I was afraid to leave the building. It was warm in there, but I was afraid to get out if I'd never get back again. So I stayed there, and I paraded up and down in front of that lobby in front of his door for what seemed an awful long time. And I was wondering what this doctor was going to do to me and what about him and so forth and so on. I was all shaky. I was sick. I hadn't had a drink that morning. And I can remember every time I walked past his office door there, I'd read his name on the door. It says, Dr. Robert Holbrook Smith, rectal surgeon. This is the guy that's going to fix me. Well, you know, by the time you arrive at the place in your drinking career that I was at that time, you're ready for anything. And this, in my fogged up way, didn't seem unreasonable. Finally, Doc came in, and he ushered me through a couple offices into his back room. And I was prepared to tell him all about my symptoms and my troubles, but he didn't allow me to do this. He took the ball away from me, and he told me all about himself, and all about which actually was my story. And I figured he was talking about me all the time, and I couldn't figure out how this guy knew so much about me. I'd never seen him before. And I got suspicious. Now, there are people here from Cleveland. They may remember this. Some of the older people from Cleveland that are older in years. At that time, they were having what they called the torso murder mysteries in Cleveland. They were finding bits of bodies wrapped in newspaper over in Kingsbury Run. And they never identified any of these bodies except finally one. There was a woman they found. There were 7 or 8 men's bodies that they found all cut up. But they identified this woman because her fingerprints. It was the only woman that was involved in the deal. But she had fingerprints. She'd had a police record. But these men, they never identified. And the newspapers at that time assumed that this, they called him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, whoever this character was. They figured he was either a butcher or a doctor that had gone berserk. And the reason they figured out, because he knew a lot about anatomy. He had a good technique in cutting up these bodies. He was doing this for kicks. And this doctor, knowing so much about me, he was all for putting me in a goonie roost out in Cuyahoga Falls, where he, as he explained, people couldn't get to me. Well, about this time, this was going through my head, and I was all for people getting to me. So I up and beat it on him. I saw my chance, and I ran out of his office and beat it and disappeared. But you know, I could never forget this man. Something happened to me. And sometime later, I was sitting there in a bottle gang. I was with a bunch of jugheads I used to drink with, and we got talking about one of our favorite subjects. I think I started at this time. We got talking about quitting drinking. And this was a high spot in my drinking career, this particular get-together, this little tete-a-tete we had. As I remember, I brought this thing out. I told him that I was going to quit drinking. And this evoked a lot of response. One blabbermouth fella in particular. And now remember, we're all drunk. This is the kettle calling the pot black and so forth. This one blabbermouth, he says, you'll never quit drinking. He says, you don't have guts enough to quit drinking. I says, I'll show you. I know a doctor down in Akron will fix me. He says, nobody can fix me. You're no good. He says, quit drinking, he says, takes determination. He says, to have determination, you need a chin. He says, you got a chin like Andy Gump. You're no good. I says, I'll show you. And you know, I think this was the last vestige of pride that I had left in me. I had to do something about it. So I got a hold of someone's phone. If I live to be 1,000, I'll probably never find out whose it was. But someone got a fine phone bill because all these calls to Akron are long distance. And I don't know whose phone it was because we didn't have phones where we were. But somebody got a swell bill because Doc told me I called him numerous times that day. I only remember calling him once. But he told me to meet him at Akron City Hospital in the morning, and I did. I made it down there. And that was my beginning of this way of life. Now, things were quite a bit different in those days than they are now. As I said before, this was not known as AA at that time. This was known as the Oxford Group. And we had a lot of different little things we went through in the Oxford Group, forms and ceremonies that we don't have in AA today. But that was my beginning, and I went to Akron for 15 months. And I missed 2 meetings in all that time. I used to spend a lot of time on weekends with those people. Either I'd be down there or they'd be in Cleveland. After 15 months, we started our first group in Cleveland. And we had about a dozen fellows who were going to Cleveland. Some of them had wives. And we had quite a contingent that went down there every week. And there was difficulties coming up between the alcoholics and the Earth people, the Oxford Group people. There was frictions, and there were a lot of reasons why alcoholics had to be by themselves and break away from this. During 1938, I came in February 38. During the fall of 38, the book was written, and the 12 steps were written. And the book was published in February of 39. When we started our group in Cleveland, we started it as Alcoholics Anonymous. We took the name from the book. Cleveland, Ohio was the first group that started as Alcoholics Anonymous. New York and Akron started in the Oxford Group, and they eventually switched into the AA name. So that's something, a little history you Clevelanders probably can take home with you. At any rate, we started on a different basis. In the Oxford Group, we used to operate on the 4 principles of the 4 absolutes of absolute honesty, unselfishness, purity, and love. When the AA book was written, the 12 steps were written. 12 steps were written as a way of life, a way to change a person's life. It was felt that the only way an alcoholic could recover was by a complete change of his life. You know, this thing of alcoholism, let's talk about it a moment. It's an old thing. Alcoholism is as old as history's recorded. We read about the exploits of alcoholics in the Bible. We read about it in ancient history. We read about it way back. Read about Noah. Even old Noah got potted. Remember that story? Now, this is a long time ago. And all these years, things have been tried to change this thing of alcoholism, cure alcoholics, help them, shoot them, anything. A lot of things have been tried. But nothing was ever successful until about the last 25 years or so. It's the last few years. Now, why is this? You know, alcoholism to me is, some people, they have some very peculiar notions about what it is. You hear people talk about it being a habit. It's not a habit. We could break any habit we have. We never could break alcoholism as a habit. Some people talk about alcoholism being a matter of a taste. Holy smokes, if you think this is a taste, if anyone got that notion, I wish they'd try some of this stuff I was drinking at the end. I paid 7 cents a pint for my booze, and I bought it in a wallpaper store. Believe me, I didn't drink this for its palatable qualities. It's neither a habit nor is it a taste. If it were a habit or a taste, we wouldn't lose our families, our jobs, our friends, everything that's near and dear to us. Not by a long shot. Alcoholism is an obsession. It's a condition of the mind. It's an illness. It's an illness, however, that I'm quite sure we'll never discover a pill or a potion that will ever cure. Alcoholism has to be handled in a different way. All these years, these many, many years, people, you and I have had the same treatment. We've had all this good advice. People have given me some of the finest advice. I've had $1 million worth of good advice before I ever got to AA. People told me if I didn't quit drinking, what was going to happen to me. And boy, they were right. See? But it happened. It didn't stop me. And they told you the same thing. They told me what was going to happen to my liver. They told me what was going to happen to my head. What's going to happen to this? What's going to happen? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my family? Am I going to lose my self-respect? Am I going to lose everything? I did. So what? I wanted to get out of this thing of alcoholism. I couldn't. You know, all these people who have tried, and there's a lot of people still trying, and why they fail with us, with you and I as alcoholics. One big reason why they fail is they assume that you and I are logical thinking creatures. Every time, I hope there's not one here, but every time I get up on one of these podiums and I see that sign "Think" on there, I turn it over. I don't want to offend anyone. They think that we can think. An alcoholic don't think. An alcoholic feels. And he never acts on anything until he feels a certain way. So the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has to change us in the way we feel about things, about ourselves and about everything else. We are an emotional people. We act on emotions, not on sound judgment. That's something that a lot of people never find out. That's why so many of these programs fail with alcoholics. And that's why you and I in AA are able to transmit something or communicate with an alcoholic successfully. This is the doggonest outfit in the world. You walk into an AA meeting, you meet a bunch of people you've never seen before in your life, and in 10 minutes you're telling them all your secrets, things you wouldn't even tell your mother, and everybody laughs about it. Okay? This is something. You know, you have to be a total failure before you're qualified to get in here. I got a big kick out of one time. I happen to be a salesman. I work for an insurance company. And you know how these insurance outfits are. Any of you fellas that have been in the sales field know that they are the exponents of the biggest bunch of bull in the world. And we have these conventions every year, and they get all the men in to the home office, and they want to tell you what's going to happen next year and what you're supposed to do and all the new stuff coming out. And they wine you and dine you and show you a big time, make you feel like a big wheel. But they always do one thing. They always have a high-powered speaker to talk to the men. I remember a couple of years ago I was up to home office, and they really had a honey. This boy was really something they had up there. He was a man from General Motors, and he spent all his time going around talking to sales organizations. And he really had a pitch that really stopped them all. But today he was talking about success. And he went on talking about eat success, think success, dream success, everything is success. He just pounded that success thing home, boom, 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 see? And then he winds up and he says, "You never heard of anybody standing up in front of a bunch of people and bragging about being a failure, did you?" I says, "Buster, I got news for you." This is the one fellowship in the world where we do everything. If we do everything diametrically opposite of what we would in good business practice, we make a huge success. And that's about right. This thing of alcoholism only affects certain people. There's a lot of people who can never become one of us, no matter how hard they try. I think the privilege of being an alcoholic is reserved for a chosen few. I used to drink with a lot of jugheads who drank an awful lot of whiskey and booze and different kinds of things they are not alcoholics. They can quit whenever they find some hobby that's more engaging. But not us. Not us. No siree, I know this because I have proven this. The alcoholic is a breed of cats all his own. And as I say, everybody can't make this league. This is a real exclusive league. And I get a big kick out of a lot of these birds that I've met around in AA. Some of these fellas who have drank themselves down to their last 2-second yacht or something like this. And other people I meet, well, take some people outside of AA. They belong to some fancy country club. They pay $5,000, $10,000 for a membership and probably cost them $2,000 or $5,000 a year to belong to it. And they think they really belong to something great, you know? And probably it is, you know. But did you ever stop to figure out what your entrance requirement is to get into this league? Anybody who get in here under $50,000 is sneaked in. Believe me, I value my membership here. And it's a wonderful thing, and it is a miracle that we're all here. If you don't think this is a miracle, think about this sometime. Go home and think about this. Of all these years that we've been drinking, and all these years that these alcoholics have been walking across the face of the earth for centuries, just a few thousand of us in the last few years have had this opportunity. And there's millions others who will probably never have this chance that'll follow us. But why did you and I get this chance? This is a miracle. It's something for us to think about. I think it'll give us place a new value on our membership here if we consider this seriously. We are the chosen people. They talk about the Jews being the chosen people. That's hogwash. We are the chosen people. We are. Where would you ever find a fellowship like this? The outgiving and the outpouring of love that we find in here. I belong to organizations and clubs and lodges and veterans groups and things such as that. I like them. I enjoy them. But they have no relationship to what the Spirit is in a fellowship such as ours, in our fellowship here. There's nothing like it. And you and I have this privilege. Now, how about this alcoholic fellow? I mentioned a moment ago that I think he's a different breed of cats than anyone else. And I don't think everyone can be one. I think you have to have certain characteristics to be an alcoholic. There are drunks and there are alcoholics. Every alcoholic is a drunk, but every drunk is not an alcoholic by a long shot. Believe me. Because I've laid drunk with all of them. Now, the alcoholic, I think you can pigeonhole him by characteristics. I've never seen an alcoholic yet who is not a high-strung individual. This alcoholic is a very sensitive soul. He's always going around looking for someone to hurt his feelings. He's like a big kid. We feel, we cry. I see in this fellowship, I have never seen this happen in any lodge meetings I've been in or veterans meetings. They talk about some horrible things in veterans meetings sometimes about their poor old buddies. I never see a guy cry. How many guys have you seen cry in here? It's not unusual for a fellow to break all up in this fellowship, and a girl. We're sensitive people. We're like a bunch of kids. It's something different in here. The alcoholic is the biggest liar that ever wore shoes. He's a conniver and he's a thief. I would steal a red-hot stove. Anything. I used to bring home some of the oddest trinkets for which I would have no use whatsoever, but when I was picking them up, I thought perhaps sometime there may be some need for this. But I'd bring it along with me. Some of the doggonest things I used to collect of other people's. But the alcoholic is an extremist. He never does anything by halfway measures. It's whole hog or nothing with the rummy. He's an idealist also. You probably wouldn't think so sometimes, but he is. He is really an idealist. He's a great guy, and he wants to have fun. He's really a social creature, and he's been so lonesome, and so he's just been discarded by anyone, and he's been booted out, and he's rejected. He's lonely. I was never so lonely in my life as when I came to on that waterfront in New York with the realization that I had not one friend, there was not one person in the world who cared whether I lived or died. This is an awful feeling. I shall never forget it. Today, I have thousands of friends. It's wonderful. People make a fuss over us. They accept us. They love us. We do for one another. We don't expect too much of each other, but the love is here. I have never seen a fellowship like this. I don't like to hear AA spoken of as an organization. It's a fellowship. It's a fellowship of the redeemed. Now, since we know that alcoholism has been around a long time, we know something about who the alcoholic is, and the rummy. What do we do about it? All these things have been tried. We've been persuaded, we've been cussed, we've been discussed, we've been kissed, we've been kicked, we've been damned, we've been praised, we've been hired, we've been fired, we've been rehired and refired. Everything's happened to us. People have lectured us, people have thrown us out, people have taken us back in. Everything, we build things up and it all goes down again. What happens? How can we work with a fellow like this? What can we do? AA has the answer in these 12 steps of ours. I'll spend the next hour and a half on the 12 steps. In the Oxford group, people were always talking about life-changing. The Oxford group were a bunch of people who were of a religious persuasion. They were trying to live better lives by Christian principles, by good spiritual principles. And they felt that by adopting and accepting these principles and surrendering their wills and their lives to the care of God, they would live differently, they'd be different people, which was true. One of the greatest things that ever happened to me was after a meeting in Akron one night, one of the boys came to me, this Bill Van Horn. He's dead now, all those fellas are gone. Bill came to me, and Bill was a great, maybe some of you folks around Ohio knew him. He was a terrific guy. Bill was a great big husky fellow, and he had been, he was on a small pension from the First World War. And when he get that pension the first of the month, he always would really go on a tear, and he thought he could whip the police department in Kent and in Akron. And this he couldn't do, but he kept trying. And he had so many nightsticks laid over his head that he got silly. And finally, the folks, they couldn't put up with this anymore, and they had Bill probated. They put him in the Massillon State Insane Asylum, and they threw the key away on him. That's where Doc Smith found Bill. And Bill wasn't any nuttier than the rest of us, only when he drank, he was like an Indian. He'd go blah. But when he was sober, he's a fine guy. So Doc got him out of there and put him in the group in Akron. And for some reason or other, Bill preceded me by about 6 months in the group, and for some reason or other, he took a great shine to me. He used to spend a lot of time with me after meetings. And one night he came to me after a meeting, he says, "Clarence," he says, "I'm going to give you the answer to this whole thing." He says, "I'm going to give you something. I want you to read this. I want you to memorize it. I don't want you to ever forget it, because here's the answer to the whole, here's a scoop right here." So Bill reaches down, pulls out his billfold, which is all stuffed and crammed full of old papers and cards and clippings, everything but money in there, see? And he pulls all this debris out in a pile, and he finally comes to a little piece of paper, and he hands it to me. And on this paper was a Bible verse. And I looked at this Bible verse, and I looked at this big gorilla, and I thought, well, maybe they've let him out too soon. But anyway, Bill gives me this, and it's one of my very favorite verses. It was a 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, the 17th verse. And it reads, "Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new." That had a tremendous impact on me. If any man be in Christ, he's a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. And this was our approach to this in the old Oxford group. A new life. Everything passed away, everything gone. This is our approach in AA. Now, where we supplanted a lot of things the Oxford group had, we had to, because we had to have something here that had more of a universality to it than the Oxford group did. I was talking to some of the boys here tonight about that, and one of the reasons why we had to break away from the Oxford group people. It would have automatically eliminated a lot of people who deserved to have this. Some certain religions couldn't stand for some of the forms and ceremonies that were peculiar to the Oxford group. When this AA program was written, we could go along without these objectionable items in the Oxford group program. So we use this 12-step program as a means of changing our lives. Let us go over these steps. You probably have heard interpretations of the 12 steps before. But let me say this. I'm very fortunate that I was there when these were written. I was there when the book was written, and I know the intent of these steps. Perhaps I have a little different slant on them than some people have, or that you have heard before. I would like to give you some of my slant and interpretation of these steps, which is our program and which is our way of survival.